This 5-part series of videos has two purposes. Since I built my bicycle camper in 2018, many people have asked me if I was going to publish construction plans, and I did. And I'm offering the plans for free to anyone who is interested in building a collapsible bicycle camper of their own. These videos will serve as an accessory to the plans to help builders better visualize the 5 stages of construction. That's the first purpose. The second purpose is to show how the idea of a collapsible bicycle camper came about and how through trial and error I was able to finish with a usable product. So stand by for part 1. First, I had to establish what were the qualities I was looking for in a bicycle camper that I could sleep in, and this is what I decided were the basic needs. It had to be lightweight, so I figured that if I designed it for the wheels to come off, I wouldn't have to make the structure strong enough to support my weight, and I wouldn't need any levelers to stabilize the trailer in camping mode. Also, with a camper sitting solidly on the ground, I could then incorporate pull-out compartments at the foot and on the side, making the camper extensible. It had to be compatible with motor vehicle traffic. Other campers I had seen were too wide for that. I wanted the total width not to exceed the width of the bicycle's handlebars, so that the trailer wouldn't stick out into the traffic more than the bike. The bicycle's handlebars are 30 inches wide, and the trailer that I built has a wheel track from the outside of one wheel to the outside of the other of 30 inches. To be highway compatible, it also had to present the smallest surfaces possible to the wind, headwinds and side winds. So it had to be narrow, low, and as short as possible. The body of the camper that I built is only 24 inches wide, 20 inches high, and 65.5 inches long. Other campers I had seen were more than 6 feet long and 3 to 4 feet wide and high. It had to have a side entrance. Because of my lack of flexibility, the idea of crawling in through one of the ends and then turning myself around inside didn't appeal to me. A side entrance would make it a lot easier to enter and exit. It also allows me to sit sideways, to rest or relax, or to put on my shoes, and also to allow attaching a vestibule to the side, making it much larger. It had to offer lots of headroom in camping mode. This meant that it would necessarily have to be expandable. I began working my plan on paper. The solar cargo trailer that I had built the previous year was made in 2 parts. I tried to imagine a camper built in 2 parts where the top part would be raised above the bottom one to form a space with lots of headroom. But I couldn't figure out a way to raise the top without the help of another person or without involving a complex, heavy mechanism. I was looking for a head clearance of 48 inches. Which added to the thickness of the frame and the floor would make it 26 inches high in towing mode, which is more than I wanted. So I began tinkering with the idea of making it in 3 levels. The top level would be a hood, which, when lowered, would cover the entire trailer, making it rainproof. I came to the idea of making the rear wall articulated with piano hinges, which would allow me to raise the hood easily by myself. I began by building a cardboard model, and it was promising. So I then built a scale model out of wood and cardboard like this one. It had to be as large or larger than a 2-man tent. By adding a pull-out at the foot, it gave me an extra 18 inches in length, and a pull-out on the side opposite the door made it wider. This increases my elbow room when I'm lying down. The lateral pullout adds 15 inches to the width on that side. And to increase the width on the entrance side, I added a vestibule made of nylon that adds 41 inches to the width, making the overall width 80 inches. It would also have to accommodate all my gear while I'm inside the camper. Some camper designs have ignored this necessity of camping life. It would have to allow space for charging all my electronic equipment without having it spread all over the floor like in a tent. That meant my laptop, smartphone, GoPro camera, e-bike batteries, bicycle lights, CPAP machine and razor. Ideally, it should also allow me to bring a chair inside and sit at my laptop computer when the weather doesn't permit me to sit outside. I realized that considering the width of the hood that fits over the body of the camper and of the thickness of the walls of the body, I would be left with only 22.5 inches in width. At this point I was doubting whether I could face sleeping in the confined space, so to resolve this issue I built a full-size cardboard model which I set up in my dining room as shown in this picture. I slept in it for an entire night to make sure I was comfortable and there weren't any unforeseen problems. I was pretty sure that the pullout on one side and the doorway on the other side would provide me with enough room on each side. As it turned out, I slept like a baby all night. That was really encouraging. So this is when I decided that I'd take a chance and go ahead and build one. At first, I was going to use the wheels from my Bériault Nomad, which have a track of only 24 inches as measured from the outside of one wheel to the outside of the opposite one. That plan was to incorporate wheel wells to accommodate the wheels, yet allow me to make the trailer 24 inches wide. This is the drawing of the frame that I had made. But then I decided that if I used the Nomad wheels and tow bar, I wouldn't be able to use my cargo trailer, which I like to use for carrying things instead of using my car. The trailer is very useful for carrying my gear when I go sailing, or my books when I go to book selling events, or for shopping for groceries or beer. So I decided to buy only the separate parts that I needed for my new project: the wheels, the axle, and the tow bar. But then I found out that for less money than for the parts, I could buy the entire Bériault Design 2014 flatbed trailer. When I received the trailer, I discovered that the track was 30 inches instead of 24. This meant that the entire body of the camper would fit between the wheels, making it unnecessary to incorporate wheel wells, making the building of the frame simpler and making the trailer more stable in curves. The drawback of the wider track was that there would be more risk of the outside wheel running off the edge of the pavement or hitting a cement curb. I would just have to be more careful. In my test run last summer, it turned out that that wasn't really a problem. And this is what I came up with in the way of the basic frame. In this video, you will see construction details, as well as the mistakes, the corrections, and the changes I made along the way during the building process. After setting up the dining room as a workshop, I began construction. If you want to see which tools I was using, go to my YouTube video entitled Tools and Setup for Building a Bériault Bicycle Camper. To start with, I laid out all the parts of the frame on the table. I used 1.5 inch by 3/4 inch maple for the outside and the same dimensions for the joists, but used spruce instead of maple to save weight. I hot glued all the parts together. It was only later that I discovered that using hot glue added an extra 1/32 of an inch to each joint. I had not accounted for that in my measurements. For different reasons, along the way I made changes to the frame, so if you're building one of these, work according to the plan and ignore some of the details you see here. This shows me pre-drilling and screwing the axle reinforcement pieces after they've been hot glued. Now I'm assembling the parts of the frame. I use the glue gun and square technique. It's a matter of aligning the parts that you're putting together using the metal square. Then you apply glue to one of the parts, press them together while holding each against its side of the square. Hold them in place for about 30 seconds. Later, after the floor is screwed to the frame, we will screw the joists and sides together. Now that the four sides of the frame are assembled, I will glue in the transverse pieces. I apply glue to both surfaces. Then I align the transverse piece with the guide marks that are on the frame, and I press the sides together to squeeze the new piece in place, and I will hold it in place for 30 seconds. Transverse piece A5 is installed differently from the others. It's placed flat instead of on edge. It will serve to join the wood and coroplast portions of the floor. I place spacer blocks underneath to raise it to the level of the top of the frame. The reason this piece was placed flat was to make use of a piece of plywood 48 inches long and to use coroplast for the small part at the rear end of the floor. The idea was to save weight and to save on the cost of plywood since I was able to buy just a quarter of a sheet. After one season of using the camper, I realized that the coroplast wasn't strong enough. I also discovered that I was sold a piece of plywood that was actually decorative panel, which caved in when I kneeled on it. So when I replaced the floor, I made it entirely with 1/4 inch good one side fir plywood. The plans reflect that change. Here I'm cutting saw curves to create the axle groove. Now my curves are completed and they're all 3/8. Now I'm knocking the pieces out with a wood chisel and hammer. Next is to clean out the groove. Then it needs to be smoothed out by sanding. The purpose of the groove is simply to reduce the amount the axle will protrude under the frame. This will bring it to the same level as the tow bar. If your plywood is perfectly square, use it to set the squareness of your frame. Using 3/4 inch No. 6 flathead screws, affix one of the ends first. Then line up one of the long sides of the plywood with one of the side beams and screw it in place before screwing down the rest. The rear piece is attached to the side beams with metal angle braces instead of screws because we will be inserting long screws from underneath to hold the rear wall studs in place, as you will see when we install the walls of level 1. We pre-drill pilot holes and then we put in 4 3/4 inch No. 6 flathead screws. After the floor is screwed to the frame and we know the frame is square, we screw the joists to the side beams. We pre-drill pilot holes, then perform countersinks and insert 2 screws per joist. We use 2.5 inch No. 6 flathead screws. Later on in the construction of the trailer, I realized that one of the studs of the wall above the axle would interfere with the installation of the axle, so I had to widen the groove to reposition the axle a little further back. The final plans will reflect the correct positioning. Here I'm showing the bottom of the frame, and what we see here is the left front end. I'm installing the left front leveling block and I'm doing it all wrong. I had made the frame with a protrusion for mounting the tow bar, but hadn't thought it through. So later I had to cut this piece off. What I had not understood at the time was that the hood, when completely lowered, must hide the entire frame. The purpose of the 4 leveling blocks, one in each corner of the frame, is to make up for the thickness of the axle mounts and the tow bar. But the one on the left front has 2 other purposes. It serves as a support for mounting the tow bar, like on this picture, and it serves as a stopper for lowering the hood, as you can see in the following drawings. This completes part 1, the construction of the frame. The next video in this series will cover level 1, the fixed walls. If you'd like to know how to obtain the construction plans or to buy one of my sailing books, go to my website www.robertberiault.com.